Welcome to this very special edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace, reporting live here at the famous Blue Note Jazz Club here in New York City. Blessing the band stage is jazz legend, composer, as well as pianist and arranger Bob James. Now this week he's performing new music from his brand new live album, Feel Like Making Live. And this brand new album is one very unique in that, one, it's pressed on vinyl, CD, as well as a DVD companion of the live performance, which he did in Seattle about a year ago. Now tonight you're going to see his trio, and tonight we're going to sit down and break bread and talk about why he's come full circle in his career to play with the trio, as well as we reflect on some very important heavyweights of the jazz game. In fact, tonight we sit down and talk about Eric Dolphy, in which while he was in school at the University of Michigan, had an opportunity to invite and play with him. And we talk about the process of him communicating with this jazz icon, as well as we sit down and reflect on the life of one of his contemporaries who passed during COVID, the great Chick Corea. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of the official New York record release performance of Feel Like Making Live, featuring the Bob James Trio here at the Blue Note, here on the Pace Report. There's a rich saying, everything old is new again. Congratulations on making live again.
Thank you.
Now I'm gonna give you a little caveat about this. In Black Rock, there's Rough Trade Records in the middle of Rockefeller Center, and the record, it's all they sell is records, vinyl.
Really?
Yeah.
Now?
Yes.
Oh wow! I don't have to go over and check
it out. And we talk about this because I saw your video of you. You were like a kid in a candy store opening the first copy of this record. You took. I mean, and you were very intricate with.
Yeah.
Now tell me how we go back to the gatefold, all of the elements of how we listen to vinyl brought up to 2022.
Well, as we're speaking, I'm sure you read, as I did, the news that came out in the business where vinyl outsold CDs last year.
Right.
Could we, either one of us, have predicted that in a million years? You know, when vinyl started to disappear because of cassettes and CDs and everything smaller, and you know, how could we have predicted that it would come back? Because it was too clumsy, and the cartridges have it perfectly balanced, and it got scratches on them. All these things that made us feel like, hey, we loved vinyl, but it's obsolete. It'll never come back. And now here we are in 2022, and I'm having to, you know, I'm trying to sell my product when I go on the road, and Sonny, my manager, carries the big suitcase, but it's heavy now because we got a vinyl in there, and we still don't have enough to satisfy the people who want to buy it. So it's both fantastic and crazy.
And the beautiful thing about this is that you have a DVD, you have a CD, and you have vinyl. So now you're really kind of, and then another thing to piggyback on what you said, CDs have made a drastic comeback too, which is crazy.
Yeah, it's really, thanks in large part to companies like Evolution. In my case, I'm very lucky to have become involved with them, especially in this sense of their commitment to quality and commitment to satisfy the serious fans of the music that really want to listen closely, and they want quality, and everything about the way they approached making, I feel like making a live album was, I couldn't ask for better.
Now you cut this in Seattle. Now let's paint a picture of how you cut this. You went to Seattle, and this was a studio, so you recorded the video part as well as the audio part as well.
Yeah, the president, Ashley Whitfield is his name, had this idea that he was very well aware of more and more people expect to see video. Even if it's an instrumental album, they watch YouTube, and a lot of the listening experience is expecting to see some kind of video. And very often on a jazz instrumental budget, there's not enough budget there to go in and make a fancy video the way a pop artist would do. So he wanted to counter that and commit to making sure that he had enough video information to be able to promote my espresso album. And he contacted my manager to say if he budgeted it, and would we go into a studio, recreate live versions of that all the music. But then while we were at it, and since he was going to have all of the production crew in place, would I make a list of a bunch of other stuff, either things from other albums or some things that may not have been available otherwise. And he gave me this long list, much too many tunes. As soon as he told me, he said, that's a lot of preparation. And
I know you do a rendition of Rocket Man, Elton John's Rocket Man.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff because he wanted not only the existing songs from other recordings, but maybe something that I had never recorded before. He put that in the mix, and I can't even remember when the Elton John song came into our mind to do an instrumental version of that, but I thought it would be fun to do it. And so yes, we came up with this list, and we had a great crew. Quality level was very high. I had never worked with at that studio before, and I'd never worked with either the audio or the video people, but they were great. It was very cooperative, very attention to just simply making it the highest quality that they could. So I'm very proud of it in that respect.
let's talk about the trio. I've seen you in so many variations of your group. Foreplay, I've seen you with Kirk Whalum. I've seen you a lot of ensembles. It seems like the trio, we're going back full circle again. That's something that you started with and you're bringing it back. Why do you feel more comfortable and at ease in a trio setting?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because I've been asking the same thing to myself in the last couple of weeks, because I'm doing it now. I'm going out on a tour with the trio and realizing how much I love it, and very much realizing with all these years having gone by that, wow, I'm at this senior part of my life, and when I was in college, that was my dream, was to go into jazz, and specifically that piano, bass, drums format. That I had listened to Bill Evans and I'd listened to Oscar Peterson, and that was my dream. That was where I thought the piano, it was like the ultimate setting where you could really show your wares. I got sidetracked because I came to New York still having that dream, but then there wasn't really any work for me at that time. I didn't have enough reputation to carve out a trio career, so I took whatever work that I could get, which eventually ended up at CTI Records, where I was really working more as an arranger than I was as a pianist. I would get some gigs as a pianist, but the dream of piano trio had kind of gone out of my mind during that whole period in the 1970s. So now here we are, 21st century, and I'm still trying to hit it as hard as I can, but what keeps coming back to me that I want to do for quality of life and whatever is I'm back at the jazz piano trio again.
pandemic has been mind-boggling. I mean, it shut the world down, but we also lost some very important heavyweights. And when I think of the gentleman that I'm about to bring up, I think about you because he's your contemporary, and you guys had an affinity for classical music, and I'm talking about the great Chick Corea. Tell me the first time coming to New York City, you hearing the name Chick Corea, and you guys are about the same age. You guys kind of evolved differently in different directions in the late 60s and 70s, but you guys were on the same trajectory music-wise. What was the first time you heard, and what did you think of Chick the first time you heard?
I had an interesting memory about that, which Chick actually reminded me. We were both playing a festival over in Tokyo, in Japan, the Tokyo Jazz Festival. And he came down to my dressing room, knocked on the door, and I wasn't seeing him much at all, you know. In the case of another piano player, if he gets the gig, I don't. You know, I wouldn't have been likely to be hired in his band, and vice versa. So I wasn't seeing him much, and only really knew him very casually. But he said, "I just want to thank you," and I wondered why he wanted to thank me. But it turned out that I had been working for Sarah Vaughan as her pianist for 4 years, and finally decided to end my my time with her. And after that, one of the piano players that ended up playing for Sarah for a while was Chick Corea. And Chick had the gig with her for a while, and as I recall it, I had let him have some of the charts that I had in the book there that you know, he kind of took over. But what happened for him is that he got auditioned to go with Miles Davis and called me, and I had forgotten about this, but he had a gig with Sarah that was going to prevent him from being able to do his audition for Miles, and he called me to see if I was sub for him because I knew the book and whatever, and apparently I did, and I helped him out, took Sarah's gig, and he got the audition with Miles and got the gig. And it changed his life, right, obviously, drastically after that. I mean, not in the same way that it did for Herbie, but because he wasn't with Miles that long, but nevertheless, he remembered it as being pivotal, and at least, even though I was only kind of a footnote, that having helped him out by subbing for him for Sarah Vaughan, that's how he got the gig.
That's crazy, Bob, because you know there were some game changers who, you know, the late 70s is where the electronic era came through with the fusion, and there's Joe Zawinul, who I think was a little bit ahead of Chick by just maybe an inch, and then as the 70s segue, it's you, it's Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Keith Emerson, Stevie Wonder. I mean, you guys.
Thank you for mentioning my name in that category.
Well, I have to, because I mean, just the fact that you guys took the electronic era and you took these instruments and you had to incorporate it in your music. That's why I say you guys are contemporaries, because you were kind of far off with the arranging and the producing part, but at the same time, your keyboard records stand out also, as Chick was more of a, and I keep saying this, he wrote a lot of music for different ensembles. How did you take his composing as well as his playing style?
As you were talking, excuse me for going off on a tangent, but I recall some of the jazz pianists that were sort of like my contemporaries seemed to embrace the electric instruments, but most of them didn't, and they played it reluctantly, and I could tell they were playing it reluctantly. So they were either being asked to play the Fender Rhodes, and I could hear by the touch, and I'm going to include in that some pretty big names. Oscar Peterson,
Yeah.
Bill Evans. I never liked the way they played the electric piano because I could feel they weren't into it.
Right.
They didn't change their technique. They didn't change their touch to take advantage of the timbre, everything about the Fender Rhodes is like a completely different instrument. And I could feel this is my own interpretation, but I could feel they were trying to force it into their way, and you could probably look at the catalog of the recordings that they made on the Fender Rhodes, and not much that really stands out. And as much as I love both of them, and that I was majorly influenced by both Bill Evans and Oscar Peterson, I can't name one Fender Rhodes recording by either one of them.
I can't either. Yeah, and it's funny you say that because those electronic records that Chick did, Herbie did, and I will even put Les McCann in there because I think Invitation to Openness and Layers are some very, and your albums were just, you guys put the music in a very different plateau and how you presented it. I mean, with the Fender Rhodes, how were you reluctant at first going with the Fender Rhodes?
A little bit, yes, a little bit, but it was. I was also very intrigued about what was happening overall in jazz at that time, and that the electric bass was starting to take over a different kind of role from the acoustic bass, and so the kind of walking swing approach that I had grown up trying to get with, and play in that way, was changing, and now the role of the bass was becoming more melodic. So there were lines, and it was different, and that stimulated me a lot. I liked it, and the electric bass seemed to have a kind of a partnership with the Fender Rhodes that the Fender Rhodes didn't have with acoustic bass. Same thing with electric guitars. So that being a part of the ensemble with the Fender bass and the electric guitar and the Fender Rhodes had a fit to me that I liked, and so I was having fun with it. But did it become my favorite? I have to say no, because I always ultimately wanted to be a pianist, and you just can't express, being a pianist, you can't express everything on the road. Certain things, yes, okay, there's a vibe and a mood about it, but the piano, when you have a chance to play concert grand, Steinway or Yamaha or whatever, that's a whole different experience.
You know, at 82 years young, you know, you have done the whole gamut of everything. I mean, the last time we talked about a lot of things. But one of the things I find out more about you, I gotta understand how you got to work and come to appreciate Eric Dolphy.
Wow. Interesting you bring that up, because I was just thinking about Eric last night, because there was a poster of him, one of the Blue Note posters over there in the sales area, and as soon as I saw he had a very unique face, and as soon as I saw it, and then with the bass clarinet kind of in the background, I knew it was him. I didn't see his name on there, but his memories flooded back. It was a very naive time. I was still in college and graduate school, and I was a big jazz fan. Hadn't even been in New York yet at that time, but I was a big fan of some of Eric Dolphy's recordings and some of his playing with Charles Mingus, and I knew who he was, and I knew he was unique. And I was very involved in sort of avant-garde jazz at that time, very interested in going out to the fringe and exploring that. So I had been asked to be a player on several compositions at an avant-garde music festival called Once, that was in Ann Arbor, Michigan at that time. And I got to know the people that ran that festival and some of the other avant-garde composers that were there. And they finally asked me to compose a piece for them for one of the performances. So I came up with this idea of composing a piece to feature a singer and saxophone. Didn't know exactly what, but then I thought, how brave could I be, and see if I could get a little bit of a budget from the festival to invite Eric Dolphy to come out to play this festival. And they had a history of inviting various distinguished people at that time, so I thought, hey, at least I could ask, you know, all they could do is say no. And so they agreed to let me do it, and I had a couple of connections to try to find out his phone number and some information about him, because I'd never met him, didn't know him. And just on a whim, I contacted him, and he said yes. And so he came out, played my piece, and it was a great experience. He stayed a few extra days, and there was a small jazz club in Ann Arbor where I was playing, and he came up and sat in with my trio, and I got to know him a little bit. But then, very sadly, it was not too long after that when he passed away at a very young age, and he was already sick at that time, I guess, and I didn't even know the details then. But what developed, if you don't mind this being a kind of long story.
Go ahead. Yeah, this is what we're here for.
It's a long story. He performed my piece beautifully, and the singer, who also was a friend, was a countertenor, the man who sings way up in the high range. And so I had put this kind of duet thing back and forth between Eric playing bass clarinet and the countertenor singer, who was primarily a classical singer at that time. So it was a juxtaposition of two very different kind of sounds and styles that was interesting to me at that time. So many years went by, and I got a letter from the singer who had performed this piece with me, who had subsequently moved to Australia and went into a totally different profession. But he remembered that event very much, because it was a big memory for him when he was in Ann Arbor. And he said that, was I aware of the fact that this recording had come out on Blue Note Records, Eric Dolphy. The name of the recording was Other Aspects. And there is my piece given another name, and my name was not on it as a composer, but it was my recording from the performance in Ann Arbor, and there it was on this Eric Dolphy album. And the producer, who turned out to be a kind of a documentarian of Eric Dolphy's life, had found this tape in Eric Dolphy's possessions, because we had given him a copy of the performance, and he took it back to New York with him. And then after he passed away, there was this tape, and the tape wasn't really marked very well at all. And the producer made a bunch of assumptions about it, and assumed that Eric had composed it. And he even kind of mischaracterized this vocal stuff, because he thought it was some kind of African chant, which had nothing to do with this piece at all. And that was in the liner notes. And the whole album came out. I was very, very frustrated about it, because it wasn't even the correct title, and it wasn't listed as my piece. So I contacted Bruce Lundvall, who was the president of Blue Note at that time, and told him about the mistake that they had made. And he was very embarrassed, and so we talked about it for a while, and I knew that it would be expensive, because the album was already out with the wrong information on it. And in order to correct that, he would have had to do a whole new release, which I was pretty sure he did not want to do. And so I made at least what I thought was a creative suggestion to say, well, why don't you release an album of mine for your label and call it Bob James Other Aspects, same title like Eric Dolphy's record. And I had some other tapes of my music that I could have put on there, including the Eric Dolphy, labeled correctly with my information, with my title, which was called A Personal Statement. And he sort of, I thought, liked the idea, but then it fizzled, and I guess didn't want to spend the money on it, and they never did it. So I thought that was the end of it, and I was very kind of depressed, because the only existing recording that was on Eric's album was not credited properly. Now more years go by. This is a part of getting old. You know, if you get old, sooner or later some things kind of have their own way of working themselves out. So another guy comes into the picture named George Claben, and his company, he's based in LA.
Resonance Records.
You know about him, George Claben?
George and Zeb, they've single-handedly taken our culture, documented culture, and putting it out. I mean, everything they put out has been phenomenal.
Yeah. So was it not Renaissance? What's the name of their label? I'm drawing a blank on the name of that label, but that's their whole thing is reissues of things, and they had done were in the process of making a 3 LP set of Eric Dolphy best of, or a collection, and they had found out through their research about my piece. And they also found out, because I had done a couple of interviews about it, and they contacted me and said they wanted to do it the right way, and with all the right information, the right personnel. And so lo and behold, the album comes out again on George Claben's label with the correct information on it, and I was able to bring the whole thing to a very nice and honorable conclusion, with my piece featuring Eric Dolphy being represented properly.
Bob, you know, he's always been known for that Out to Lunch record on Blue Note. Mm-hmm. His music, he was very special. In fact, God rest his soul, Freddie Hubbard told me this story about he was roommates with him for a little period of time when he first came to New York City. And he was talking about how a lot of the jazz community didn't really understand the music that he was trying to put out there. Do you understand? Do you think that he was ahead of his time, in his time, or do you think that had maybe 4 or 5 years later, when we get into what Train was doing with his expansion, do you think that people would have caught up with what he was trying to do?
Oh, sure. He definitely was ahead of his time, and definitely was one of those musicians in the spirit. Like, I had the chance to work with Hubert Laws a lot, and Wynton Marsalis would fall into this category of people who equally at home in classical music or jazz. They have chops, they have concept, but they have tremendous jazz ability also. So I felt that way about Eric. He could play anything, but in addition to that, he also was, how can I say, weird. He was his mind went to weird places with colors, and the way he used the bass clarinet to express what was going on in his mind. And I was so naive and wrapped up in my own world that I didn't have as much opportunity to take advantage of that amazing moment that I had for those few days. It just wasn't, it wouldn't have been in my mind at that time how important it was, that 60 years later I'd be able to talk about it and remember one of the great jazz artists of that time. And I had the opportunity. I was right there with him, and I heard it. I knew how good it was for me, but it was just one moment, and I didn't ever have a chance to follow up on it. Unfortunately, he passed away before I had a chance to make my way into New York, and maybe 10 or 15 years later I might have had a chance to work with him again, but it didn't turn out that way.
That'll do it again for this very special edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at the famous Blue Note Jazz Club here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the incomparable Bob James for his time. Make sure you support his brand new CD, Feel Like Making Live, which is now available on iTunes, Amazon.com, as well as CD Baby, or you can also order it on his website, bobjames.com. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at the Blue Note for their warm hospitality. As always, I can't stress this enough. Please like, share, and subscribe to my videos here on YouTube and Vimeo, as well as leave comments, as well as visit my website, thepacereport.com, for my weekly column, as well as my past segments. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.